Hi, I'm Clever Ghoul, but you can call me Nikki. Welcome back to the channel! While watching the latest season of Bridgerton, I was really inspired by all the art direction in the show, from the costuming to the set design. There's just all these little details that are fun to look at when you're watching. And then I just got an urge to take that sort of art direction and vibe and put it into a pair of shoes. I know that sounds like an odd connection, but I can't help it. My brain just immediately went to making over a pair of high-heeled platform sandals into something that's vaguely Bridgerton-esque. Before we begin, obviously, these are nowhere near historically accurate. This is not that kind of project. These are very much inspired, heavy on the word inspired, by the show, but we're really just going for Bridgerton vibes here. With that being said, let's get into it.
For materials, you'll need the following: a pair of shoes. You can use some that you have in your closet, a pair from your local thrift store, whatever floats your boat. Mine were from Amazon. Some upholstery fabric. Mine was way too thin and I ran into issues with it, but you can find some at garage sales, thrift stores, or your local fabric stores. You want something thick enough that it won't be stained by any glue, but not so thick that it would look weird and bulky on the shoe. Fabric scissors, painter's tape, Sharpie, hot glue. I used white fabric hot glue as I wanted the filigree elements to be white, but you could even use gold or silver or something else if you like. Silicone molds for the filigree elements, B7000, an assortment of trims, lace, gimp, ribbons, etc., flat back pearls or gemstones, pearlescent paint and a fluffy brush to apply it, and
contact cement. Now, you don't have to use this, and in the video you'll see that I ended up not using it because my fabric was too thin, but it works really well for items that need flexibility, like shoes. However, if you use this, not only do you have to be in a well-ventilated area to use it, you have to use a respirator with it. This is not stuff you should be breathing in, and even in a well-ventilated area, it's not enough to really protect your lungs. So contact cement and respirator, they're two things that go together. As always, I'll have everything linked in the description box below, and I do earn a small commission if you use those links to make a purchase, so thank you.
to start, I'm going to make a pattern out of the shoe so that we can transfer it to the fabric and cut the fabric to size. To do this, I cover one area of the shoe in painter's tape. Use more than you think because you want to be able to peel this off into one chunk later and have excess going around it. Once covered, use your Sharpie to outline the shape of the shoe, essentially tracing the ridges into the tape. This is why I said to have excess going around it, because you don't want to mark up your shoe on accident. And then mark up the pattern to show what direction the piece is in, where the inner and outer sides are, what shoe this belongs to, etc. That way, when you go to cut out the fabric, you know what you're looking at and what direction to glue it onto the shoe. Repeat this on the counter. That's the piece where your heel sits in the shoe, platform, and the heel on both sides. Once done, lay out your fabric and assess what part of the fabric you want to go where. For example, if you want the pattern to match in the same spots on both sides, figure out where that is on your fabric. Then, carefully peel off the tape pattern you just made, and before placing it down, trim the excess off so you have just the outline. I didn't do this, but I should have.
Another thing I should have done here before taping my pattern onto my fabric is testing a piece of tape on the edge of the fabric to see how the two work together, because what happened to me is I went to peel my pattern off after cutting and it ripped up some of the fabric. So if this happens to you and you do a little test of the tape here and it rips your fabric, I would recommend take your pattern and put it directly on a piece of paper and then cut it out that way, and then pin it onto your fabric and cut like you would a sewing pattern.
If your fabric doesn't come apart with the tape, place your pattern directly down onto the fabric where you want it to go. Repeat this with all pieces and then cut out your pattern with fabric scissors. I recommend cutting one piece out and placing it against the shoe to see if you need a little seam allowance around the sides before doing all of the pieces. Next, cut a piece of scrap fabric, go outside, put on your respirator, and test the contact cement on the fabric. As you can see, my fabric was too thin, so the contact cement would show if I used it.
So if this doesn't happen with your fabric and you're able to use it, working one section at a time, so like the toe strap, for example, add a thin layer of glue onto the shoe and a thin layer onto the back of your pattern piece and let it sit for 2 to 4 minutes. But then touch it to see that it's tacky but doesn't leave any residue on your fingers, and then carefully place your pattern piece onto the area that it needs to go. Don't press it down all the way yet. If you get it a little crooked at first, you can lightly peel it off and put it back down until it's exactly right, and then press around it to get it to adhere. And I would even recommend using clothespins or some clips to just lock in those edges to make sure the two really bond together. But you'll do that for the entire shoe all over if you're using contact cement. And don't forget to do this outside and with a respirator, okay? I care about your lungs. Thank you.
Since this wasn't going to work for me, I tested out a thin layer of white fabric hot glue as well as B7000. The B7000 did come through slightly, but I knew I could use it in areas where I was going to cover up the fabric. So I decided to use both the hot glue and the B7000 in this project. I added B7000 in the seam and then would do a thin layer of hot glue on the edges, starting with the toe strap and then doing the rest of the shoe. Once the fabric was on the shoes, I made some of the filigree elements. I would fill the mold with hot glue and would put it in the freezer for 2 to 3 minutes before popping it out. I made a ton of different filigree pieces to test out how I wanted things to look, and eventually only ended up using 2 different kinds of molds. This sort of arched laurel bunting and this dotted trim. Before putting any of that down, I wanted to think about the layering of the decorative elements. I knew I wanted lace over the platform fabric, so I put that down first. Then I added on the laurel filigree pieces on top of that. For the dotted trim, I measured along the sides of the body of the shoe, then I cut it and adhered it with the hot glue, and placed masking tape around it to hold it into place as it cured. From here, I kind of just worked in random sections. I added in scalloped lace trim along the top of the counter on both shoes, then I painted on pearlescent paint on top of the dotted trim on the sides. While that dried, I adjusted the ankle straps and then added on some beaded ivory and gold trim with hot glue. Then I put scalloped lace along the top and bottom edges of the toe straps, as well as around the bottom of the counter where it meets the heel. Then I layered the beaded trim on top of the counter lace, just the upper portion for now. I glued flowers onto the outer edges of the toe strap, and then I added gimp trim onto the bottom of the platform, hiding any exposed edges. Then I added lace along the back side of the heel so that it folded over onto the outer edges, and continued to add the gimp trim onto the bottom of the heel. I had accidentally stained part of the fabric earlier, so I used B7000 glue to adhere some flat back pearls to cover that up. Then I glued down a flower at the back of the heel, added the beaded trim onto the last remaining portion of scalloped lace, and finished by adding some small pearls along the edge of the heel.
Which means it's time for the reveal.
Here they are. Considering all the issues I had with the fabric, I think these ended up looking pretty great. I know you could go a lot further and add a lot more to them, but to me, Bridgerton is a little more subtle, and I think it's good to find balance between too simple and too gaudy. I think I achieved that here. They're fun and have the right vibe, but aren't too over the top. I'm not Cressida Cowper after all. The blue is very Bridgerton to me, as are the lace and floral details. The laurel elements on the platform look like some of the ceiling and wall relief molding that we see on set too. Again, totally not historically accurate, but that was never the goal. And they're still comfortable to walk in. Well, as comfortable as heels can be. I know the bottoms will get dirty, and I may actually Scotch guard them before wearing them out, but that doesn't really bother me considering they are shoes after all. Anyway, I think these are so much fun and would be such a good element to add into a costume.
If you're a fan of Bridgerton, let me know what your favorite season is, who your favorite characters are, any theories you have about upcoming seasons. I would love to hear it, so let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!